Welcome to the Ashford Teaching and Learning Conference. My name is Catherine Myers, and I will be your host for this session. I'm excited to introduce Evolving Faculty Roles in 21st Century Higher Education Contexts, presented by Lisa Marie Johnson, Assistant Professor for the College of Education at Ashford University, and John Sener, Chief Knowledge Officer at Sener Knowledge. The chat window will be open during this session for your comments, and we will have a short Q&A at the close of this session. Now, without further ado, Lisa and John.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. This is Lisa Johnson, and just want to say that after our introductions today, we'll explore the history of the evolution of the faculty role and then delve into a discussion of the faculty role at Ashford University specifically. There will be a web form provided for you to record responses to the discussions if you prefer, following the session as well. And we hope to see you active in the chat throughout the session. Both John and I will do our best to address questions along the way. In the interest of time, though, we may need to follow up with you after the session for any questions we couldn't address during the live session. So here on the screen, you see a lot of text. This is a quick overview of my background in online higher education. To quickly summarize, with Ashford, I've been a part of our community at the Denver offices, San Diego offices, and more recently as a remote assistant professor. So I have some experience around the bend in terms of the various modalities of the faculty role. I also have over 15 years experience in online higher education. As you can see there on the screen, quite a few roles in both the administrative realm as well as the faculty realm, and as an online learner myself at the graduate level. So that's a bit about me. John, how about introducing yourself?
Yes, hi, and thanks, Lisa, for inviting me to join you here in today's session. My name's John Sener, and I'm founder CKO of Sener Knowledge, which is a consulting practice based focused on higher education. I have been involved in education for over 35 years and involved in online education for over 20. I'm also the author of a book called The 7 Futures of American Education, Improving Learning and Teaching in a Screen-Captured World. And so in my experience with online education, I was at Northern Virginia Community College, where we were one of the first folks to develop degree programs in a variety of subjects. So it's great to be here, and thanks for coming, and I look forward to this session.
Definitely, yes. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So diving right in, here on the screen, we see a bit of a glimpse through history. So I'd like to start us off by focusing on the evolution of access and the nature of expertise. We'll do a bit of time traveling in the next few slides as we consider how the nature of expertise has evolved in conjunction with advances in technology, and consider how these have influenced the evolution of the faculty role. And let's keep in mind that a defining feature of faculty as educator in higher education environments, much like the teacher-educator in primary and secondary environments and the trainer in corporate environments, has always been to serve as the expert in one or more areas of knowledge and skill. Okay, so looking back 60 years to 1955, some of you may remember firsthand, and no doubt everyone is aware, that in the 1950s, in the United States at least, the distribution of expertise and access to experts was relatively scarce. Accessing expertise, and an expert typically would require a concerted effort by individuals unless they happened to be employed at an organization where experts were located, affiliated with experts through social groups or family relationships, or located in proximity to, say, a library or university, or if that individual had access to television or radio where limited types of instructional programming were offered. So in 1955, we could argue that the faculty role was regarded as a rare and often esteemed role, largely due to their scarcity and the limited access to their specialized knowledge by the wider public in person or via technology. John, did you want to add anything before we move on to the next slide?
Sure. While I'm not quite old enough to be one of the people pictured on any of these slides, they certainly do evoke for me my own schooling. And what I think what the most relevant characteristic that comes to mind when looking at these pictures relative to what you just said was that the expertise back then was based on what I call knowledge-based authority models. And that is that knowledge was, as you said, relatively scarce. It resided in campuses and people's heads, and especially experts, teachers, that sort of thing. And while knowledge, they may have talked then about how the the growth of knowledge was expanding. Certainly, relative to what we know today, knowledge was growing relatively slowly relative today, and so in effect, the means of knowledge production was held by a relative few people, and so that also contributed to its scarcity.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Good points. Okay, so we're going to flash forward now 40 years to 1995. And I think everyone in attendance today was likely around in this era to recall how dramatically the access to expert knowledge was shifted through advances in technology, particularly the World Wide Web or Internet. And also, you'll no doubt recall the revolution that began around the same time with software such as the Windows operating system and others and their associated content production tools for individual desktop publishing, sharing of expertise. So increasingly at this time in history, the faculty and students had access to the Internet, where syllabi, faculty web pages, static web pages, web rings, and a variety of other expert sources were more easily accessed. So this led to the rise of what we can call the distribution of expertise on a global scale, really unlike any other era in human history. Now also recall that although email was not entirely ubiquitous at this time, faculty were increasingly able to be reached directly by their students and fellow experts more easily than through telephone or postal mail had allowed for, and networks of expertise through listservs and various forms of online groups began to grow exponentially. It was also in this era that the first wikis came online, and co-authorship and distributed asynchronous collaborations really began to accelerate among experts and casual participants online. John, what can you add here?
Well, this slide reminds me of two stories from that time period. The first one is both when I was at Northern Virginia Community College, when a professor named Burks Oakley from the University of Illinois came to visit us. And he was very excited about what he wanted to show us. He got us some computers, and he showed us a screen, and he said, look, there's this picture on this screen, and this data came from, it went through a computer in Switzerland, and it went through from some other place to here, and it's amazing. And of course, he was describing, we're all actually looking at each other like, what is this person talking about? Well, in fact, he was talking about the World Wide Web. In that case, it was in its infancy. The other story this reminds me of is of my superior, my supervisor and the director of the Extended Learning Institute at the time there, Randy Lemke, who wrote a paper pointing out that the World Wide Web was really a big deal in that for the first time in centuries, it had shifted the historical shift of where knowledge resided. It no longer resided in campuses, exclusively on campuses, in professors' heads, et cetera, but it was actually shifting the location of knowledge from inside the campus to outside, and that was perhaps its most significant development. And I think he was prescient in pointing that out at the time, but it was also obviously a reflection of how knowledge was becoming increasingly available.
Excellent points. All right, so moving on, we're going to flash forward to the era that is defined as the Web 2.0 era, most likely, and the rise in the acceptance of online learning for formal higher education degree-seeking students. The year was 2005, 10 years ago. In this decade between 1995 and 2005, you may recall the revolutionary technological advances that continued to expand those influences we just explored that were in their infancy in 1995. So by 2005, high-speed access to online content, multimedia was becoming more of the norm for universities, faculty, students, and everyone else. The revolutions in web publishing and the interactive web, what we call Web 2.0, and the widening of access to expertise and the faculty as experts had really been firmly established as the norm in higher education and many levels. And as mentioned before, at this time, the rise of proliferation in accredited online universities was in full swing, and devices such as smartphones and other mobile computing devices were increasingly common for students, faculty, and pretty much anyone else. So access to that knowledge, and what John was speaking to in his examples, the shifting of where knowledge resides. So around 2005, we saw this proliferation of expertise-aligned services as well, such as online tutoring services and especially writing services, all leading to a growing acceptance of the value of unbundling the faculty role and the role of collaborative learning and recognition of expertise as belonging to everyone not just a few and a highly esteemed faculty as was the case much earlier in time. So we also started to see it around 2005, the organized resistance in universities against the non-peer-reviewed or scholarly web content, such as through the numerous blogs and wikis that were proliferating on the web, and even open access journals that, although peer-reviewed, did not seem to follow that traditional distribution path for print publication. So it's in this era that the nature of higher education itself began to shift dramatically as students could learn as much from freely available online web content in text, videos, interactive e-learning tutorials as they could from most of their college courses. And only a decade ago, we began to see this sizable shift in the design and structure of curriculum, largely towards standardized online courses and content and away from the faculty personalized design classroom. The classroom techniques at many institutions also really started to shift around this time towards facilitation rather than the dissemination of knowledge and its acquisition. And the faculty, especially the increasing numbers of adjunct or part-time and non-tenure track faculty, began operating in classroom contexts, we could argue, less as the all-knowing deliverer of instruction and knowledge and skill, and more as the content curator and discussant, evaluator, and guide in the learning experience. So before we flash forward to the current era, John, what can you add here?
Well, this slide reminds me of when I was researching my book, the Seven Futures book, I found that everything I was finding I could fit into one of three categories. And one was redefining knowledge, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a few moments, redistributing access, and renegotiating authority. Now, these three interact with each other as well, but I think relative to what you've just talked about on this slide, I think the two main points are that this redefining of knowledge is one of the characteristics is that it is becoming more widely accessible for a variety of reasons, and that the result of this is that there has been, out of necessity, a need to renegotiate authority. So when the nature of knowledge changes, it changes the nature of the authority relationships. When you know, for example, as you know, the example we like to think of sometimes is when in your own family, when the person who knows how to use the remote control or fix the computer or set up the cable or whatever is the teenager, then that changes the nature of the relationship of authority within that context. And the same thing, I think, happened in education for a variety of reasons, including some of the examples that you've cited.
Thanks, John. Okay, so our last stop in the time travel is the current day, 2015. And so here, today, expert knowledge is distributed globally and commonly created and shared online. Technological advances have reshaped what it means to be an expert, and we could argue the public's expectation of what constitutes expertise has been reshaped as well. Now, the image on the left of this slide shows just a few of the most popular web publishing and social sharing options for sharing expertise online by anyone, faculty, students, anyone. And the image on the right shows a classroom created at Harvard University where students are attending synchronously by a webcam and engaging with a sole faculty expert in the center of the sphere, sort of the sage in the sphere rather than the sage on the stage, in real time from various geographic locations. So now consider the gravity of the changes we've explored over this 6-year period now, and consider how expertise and its situatedness with the role of the faculty is being largely defined by their ownership and access to expertise has been reshaped. Okay, now John is going to summarize some of what we've been exploring and speak specifically on the next few slides about how these powerful technological and cultural changes have redefined what it means to be expert and what that means for faculty and higher education in terms of their position in the learning process. Go ahead, John.
Yes, actually, before you go on to the next slide, let's go back to this one for a second. I wanted to make a couple comments. And one is that the slide on the right reminds me of a TED Talk I heard recently. It was from a designer, so while it wasn't a person in the education field, he made a point which I think was very relevant to what we're talking about here. And his point was this, that the 20th century was characterized by the democratization of consumption when it came to design. And that he thought that the 21st century would be characterized by the democratization of production. And when we're talking about how knowledge is distributed, commonly created, shared, etc., that's one of the things we're talking about is the democratization of knowledge production as well. the graphic on the left makes me think of how complexity is one of the defining features of this landscape. I remember Web 1.0 when you basically could know all tools that you were going to use and be able to understand them. And this graphic just captures a relative few. I saw a graphic recently of a circle diagram showing the tools used by Arizona State University and the purposes to which they were put. And they're using over 130 tools in their online program. So this has gotten, complexity is a defining feature because it's got to the point where it's beyond our capacity to really understand every single tool that's out there, and that has implications for how we proceed as well. So in terms of the redefined knowledge, there are several characteristics, and three that I want to talk about in particular. The first one I referred to already in terms of this table. The columns are what the change factor is. The middle column is SMART, which is sort of the older or more established way or traditional way of thinking about knowledge, and SMARTer is the way in which we're evolving towards thinking about knowledge. So, for example, where it resides and where it's produced, is what I was referring to earlier about how it used to be primarily inside academic campuses, libraries, professors, people's heads, and this isn't going away. This is still going to be an important factor, but increasingly knowledge is being produced outside academia, on the internet, the World Wide Web, in the workplace, and an implication of this, for example, is in the classroom, where you have students who, each of whom has a device in their hands most likely, where they have access to more knowledge than is inside the instructor's head. The second one I wanted to emphasize is how new knowledge is created, because I think this one also touches very much on the authority aspect of it. Traditionally, we rely on knowledge that is expert authenticated. It's in a textbook. It has been vetted by someone considered to be an expert in the field, and that is what the basis of a traditional curriculum is often about. But increasingly, we're seeing the need for collaborative negotiation of knowledge, this sort of notion of expertise everywhere. And part of this is because some of the other factors, which I'll show in a minute, for example, the proliferation of knowledge. When knowledge is changing and growing so fast that it's hard to keep up with it all, then that has implications for how we look at knowledge. Probably the most obvious example of this is Wikipedia, where some faculty will insist on not allowing Wikipedia to be used as a reference, whereas other faculty will cite the study that showed that Wikipedia, at least in the study, was more accurate than Encyclopedia Britannica. So what this at least does is it calls knowledge into question in terms of what knowledge should be looked at, what knowledge is important, what knowledge is not important, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The other factor I wanted to highlight is how it's mediated. And this is a big one that speaks to the faculty role, because faculty are, and academia for centuries has been traditionally text-based. And one example that I encountered that I talk about in my book is a colleague of mine who is a professor of journalism at Columbia, teaches journalism at Columbia and is a Washington Post reporter. And she was describing to me that the problem she had with assessing her students. She felt comfortable assessing their text work because that is what she grew up with journalism, and that's what she knew. But increasingly, she was dealing with students who were strong in other areas, specifically in journalism, for example, on-camera skills or multimedia skills, but they weren't necessarily good in writing. And so the issue with her was not just how to assess these students relative to other students, but how to assess their work, because while she was comfortable assessing text, she didn't really know how to assess multimedia products nearly as well. And I think you can find this issue is happening in many other disciplines as well. So here's a more complete list, again, taken from my book. I'm not going to go over all of these. I trust you'll have access to the slide later, and you can look at it, and you can ask questions, send us emails afterwards if you'd like. But I think some of the other ones I want to touch upon that we all talked about already, for example, how knowledge is transmitted and shared. We're moving from a sage on the stage to different models, the guide on the side, but also as Lisa said earlier, guide in the sphere. But the fact that knowledge is increasingly networked, distributed, and contextual also is one of the reasons why it has to be collaboratively negotiated. The fact that it is, it's now becoming increasingly interdisciplinary means it's connected, and now instead of having a person in one area or one discipline, you have to have conversations between experts or faculty in multiple disciplines to be able to just explore the connections between knowledge. So what does this mean for the faculty roles? I think that Lisa and I have had several discussions about this in the course of preparing for this session, and it reminded me of the story that was told about the well-known psychologist B.F. Skinner, who invented a teaching machine back in the 1950s. And when he showed this teaching machine to the public, the press asked him, Dr. Skinner, is this machine designed to replace teachers? And he responded as follows. He said, the machine is not designed to replace teachers. It's designed to enhance or augment their capabilities. However, if it is capable of replacing a teacher, then that teacher deserves to be replaced. I think we're dealing with the same issue here, perhaps a little bit on steroids relative to Skinner's teaching machine in terms of the rise of things like adaptive learning and competency-based education to some extent. And so what is the answer to this? I had the same question asked to me by a professor at a keynote I did 5 years ago at Virginia Tech University. When they heard my talk, they said, oh, no, I'm going to be replaced because this is going to take the place of what I do. And the answer is still the same. If that is all that you do as a faculty member, then perhaps you do indeed deserve to be replaced. Fortunately, the reality is that's not all that you do, or that's not all that you need to do. And so here are a few ways of looking at this. One is this at the top, this cluster of words, which I think you're more familiar with already: facilitator, guide, coach, mentor. Lisa and I are facilitating this session, for example. I don't need to talk about these a whole lot because I think these roles are pretty well understood if they're not always enacted. But they're one way in which faculty roles can be enhanced in ways that personally I feel that it will take a long time before computers or technology will be able to replicate in any meaningful manner. But there are also other roles that I think that are sometimes overlooked, or they're done by some faculty but not others, or they're done sort of tacitly without really reflection or realization that they're being done or that they are really important. And a couple of examples of this is one is which I call contextualizers, and that is when you have a lot of knowledge being produced rapidly that needs to be negotiated, that there's the issue of, well, how do you put that knowledge in context? That's one of the roles that faculty can play. Faculty are still, experts in the field, and they can still, while they don't have to be just the transmitters of knowledge, they can take the knowledge that's become more widely available and put it into context. At an undergraduate level, that might mean simply helping students make sense of what knowledge is appropriate, what knowledge is not, what knowledge is useful, and what knowledge is not. At the graduate level, where students are producing knowledge, it could be that the students are, the role of the faculty is to help place in the context of the profession and the discipline and the field. Another one I like to call knowledge ambassadors. We tend to forget sometimes when we've been in education for so long that a lot of our subjects are very abstract, and things like algebra or biology or economics are really not common. They're not first nature. They don't come to us easily. That they're, in effect, they're artifacts of, to many people, for example, first-generation college students, they are artifacts of a foreign culture. And so the job of a faculty member is to be an ambassador from the knowledge culture to that new culture, to make them excited about it, to provide context, to help them make sense, and help them, show the glories and wonders of that knowledge. So what this does is then it brings that context expertise full cycle, or in this case, full spiral, because it enhances the value of the content expertise itself. A faculty member is no longer valuable for knowing content just because they know the content, but because they can do these things with the content. They can help students utilize content. So, Lisa, comments and questions about that? Or comments?
John, no, that's all good. That's all really, hopefully everyone is still with us. We're about to move into more of the discussion-based portion of the session. So if you've been stretching or away from your screen, please come back to your computer now and get ready to participate. The things that John just presented really encapsulate well for us our time travel experience and all the history we've given. So now we're going to move into, again, the discussion based. And you can respond here in the chat, or feel free with this web form that I'm linking in the chat now to participate there either anonymously or by including your contact information. So apologies to everyone for this very text-heavy slide, but if you could read the list of 10 influential factors on the screen from Turov that were published in 2006, and recognize these factors continue to be influential even today, a decade later. And then using the survey link in the chat box or typing in the box directly, if you would take a moment to just identify here, which factor do you think has been most influential on the evolution of the faculty role? For me, I think number 7, the rise of the part-time or adjunct faculty and the increasing reality of the career adjunct, whereby faculty are often teaching multiple courses, especially online for one or more universities, has been extremely significant. But ultimately, it's items number 10 and 1 that are most impactful. This shift of public, for-profit, and private colleges to fully online modalities, and the disappearing geographic monopolies in education services. While our participants are typing in the chat, John, what is your take on the most influential factor?
Well, I was actually going to put mine in the chat, but it's a good question to ask. As I said the last time we did this, I think it changes for me every time I do it. But I'm going to go with number 7, especially I think in this context, number 7 and 10. And I also like shifting modalities. I like the rise of professional adjunct. I think has been a big changer. I also like number 2 to some extent, especially perhaps more in the context of a for-profit university like Ashford. And for some reason today I'm liking number 8, the increase in adult learners. Again, when I did the research in the book, I was struck by, I remember a time, I'm old enough to remember a time when there were more traditional learners in higher education than non-traditional learners. But when I did the research for the book, that change has happened so long ago that I couldn't even find any sources that would cite when it happened. I just know it happened a long time ago, and I think the ratio, depending on who you talk to, is now something like 70-30 or 75-35 in favor of non-traditional students. So I think that's a big one, too.
Thanks, John. Okay, so in the chat we have a lot of responses here, and thank you for your participation. Again, I hope you'll also record your responses on that Google form that was linked there in the chat, and I'll plug that in again for anyone that wants to open it up. The discussion hopefully will continue after today's session. I'm hoping this brings a dialogue for us. And on that point, let's bring it home to Ashford University and our experience as associate and full-time faculty in the scheme of what it means to be faculty today in the 21st century. So to speak a bit about the specialization and unbundling of services, consider that maybe 100 years ago, groundskeeping, food services, as well as instruction would all be reasonable expectations of duties for faculty. But today, taking for example our model at Ashford, which is not really that much different from other models used by universities today, especially online universities, we have an extreme unbundling of the faculty role. So to the right of the screen, you can see a list of just a few of the main areas of services provided by staff teams, internal and external to the university. With this unbundling, we have to ask, what is the actual role of the faculty today? Is the faculty, are we evaluators, mentors, or ultimately only the facilitator of discussions in the modern online classroom, or graders, evaluators? And if yes, what is the significance of this for the notion of faculty as expert and as esteemed position in the landscape of the student's educational journey? Okay, so those are somewhat rhetorical questions. Feel free to chat. I'm excited to see your comments on those questions I just asked. But now we're going to move into a few slides with specific questions. And you're invited to post responses in the chat or to provide your responses in the web form that was linked in the chat, or both. And John and I will review responses from today's recording on the web form and work to summarize the comments and follow up with anyone who indicates in the form they would like further conversation. And eventually we're going to share the results of today's session with our deans, our provost, our faculty support staff, our Senate, and any other team that's interested to help drive forward this conversation about what the faculty role at Ashford University is today and going forward as we continue to innovate and position our institution as a leader in the 21st century scheme of higher education. So here's our first main discussion question. Which duties most satisfy you personally and professionally, or both, as a faculty with Ashford University? And let's just take about 30 seconds or so. You can pop in some ideas. And again, you've got that web form where you can give more elaborated responses after the session. We got the period of silence as folks talk, so probably should add some background music.
Well, I was just going to chime in, Lisa. This is such a great topic. So I see that everyone is typing in there. I think that you and John have just brought up so many wonderful points, and I love to see everyone communicating and throwing out ideas. And Glenn is typing something now. This is great.
Thank you for that. Paula, I love your point about the creation. And I going back to this notion of the shifting role and the unbundling of services, especially at Ashford, it really does in some ways give us more affluence as the expert in the faculty, and affluence meaning time. We're able to invest more time away from certain services previously required of us as duties to provide, and we can focus a lot more on the creative aspects of our instruction. So there are many advantages to be highlighted. Certainly not all a negative removal of duties, but an allocation of duties, possibly, again, leading towards a more, free time, so to speak, to actually do more instruction. Earlier there was a comment about the control of curriculum and, the tug of war between the publishers and the university and the standardized curriculum. Those are really powerful things to follow up on as well. Okay, in the interest of time, please keep sharing your ideas for this question. I'm going to move us to our next question. This is, if you're not comfortable sharing in the chat in the live recorded session and you'd like to, provide your feedback anonymously, please use that web forum to talk a little bit with us about what could be changed about your duties as a faculty at Ashford to bring more satisfaction. What would you like to do more of or less of? What could be changed about your duties? And I'm speaking here to our associate faculty as well as our full-time faculty, and many of our staff as well as full-time faculty teach courses as associate faculty in that role. So in your comments in the web form or even in the chat, feel free to identify your role if you think that would contextualize your comments. Really excited to, again, open the door and open the conversation with our community of faculty to talk about what we want now and going forward from our university in terms of our duties and our position in the student's educational journey. I agree with you, Stephen. That aha moment is awesome, and hopefully we'll get to more interactive video-based course environments. I know there's a lot of technologies being explored for that at Ashford to bring more real-time and asynchronous video-level interactions so we can see more of those aha moments in the body language of our learners. For now, we are very much a textual environment, though. So moving on to the next question, what could, and this is really the crux of what we do, right, learning outcomes. So this final question is, what could be changed about your duties as a faculty with Ashford University that you think could improve student learning outcomes? So, to elaborate on that question, what more could we be doing as faculty? What more in terms of duties or responsibilities or input into the learning journey for students could we have in our roles as the degree, experts and interlocutors of the learning to bring more success for students in terms of their learning and overall student engagement and experience? And again, there's that link to the web forum. All right. It looks like you guys are headed to the web form for the most part. So we're going to wrap up with one question, last question, and then we'll do some summary with our references and resources from today and contact information. So if you could, whether it's a one-word summary in just terms of reaction, following the first level of the Kirkpatrick model for training, evaluation, and feedback, what is your reaction to today's session? What's impacted you the most? Please feel free to type your responses there in the chat. Would love to hear from you in terms of what's been impactful for you from today's presentation. And as you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and move into our last slide. My contact information as well as John's are here on the screen. We just have a few references related to today's session because most of the presentation's content really derives from both John and my vast experience, personal and professional, in online and in higher education generally. So please feel free to follow up with us after the session. And I think we're doing really good for time, which is great because I know everybody's excited to leave this session and get to our wonderful keynote coming up from Dr. Newton Miller from the College of Education. That will be directly after today's session. So John, did you have any comments or questions or anything you'd like to add here as we wrap up?
Well, Lisa, I would only say that we are actually not only doing well on time, we're doing fabulous on time. I did not know that people were angling to get to a keynote session, but I know we have several minutes. In fact, we have, it looks like we have at least 10 minutes. Of course, we can always end early, but if people would like to make additional comments in the chat, that'd be great. In any event, I appreciate the opportunity to be in this session, and thanks again to you, Lisa, for inviting me. And I look forward to reading your comments and any additional comments in the chat.
Thanks, John. Again, my honor. And so Marge Borden has a really great interesting comment about the integration of multiple faculty roles. I think in regards to one of the earlier questions, you can press #6 on your phones to come on the line, and I'll leave it to the conference organizers here to cut us off in time for everyone to get to the keynote. Feel free to get on the line and speak if you'd like, and we'll just hang out here and address any questions that you might have.
Hi, Lisa. The participants do not have the ability to unmute their phones. They shouldn't. Everybody is muted so that the line is just open for you and John.
Oh, okay. Well, I scratched that then. No voice allowed.
We just want to hear your voices.
Well, then we can keep talking until time's up. I'm good at that. I see Glenn's comment about connection between the adjunct faculty and the course designers. And again, since I'm not an Ashford person, I don't know, can't supply as much context as Lisa can. But I can see that would be, that sounds like it would be a good thing to have. What is the current state of that connection currently, Lisa?
Great point and good question. I didn't see Glenn's comment, so thanks for pointing that out. So I'm heavily involved in curriculum design with Ashford as a full-time faculty, and what I can say is the current culture is that, especially with our move to a full-time faculty model back in 2012, around the time of the shift to WASC accreditation, we began to situate the course development away from associate faculty contract teams and into the full-time faculty realm. And as emphasized earlier, I'm going to scroll back here on a slide to here, the unbundling. You can see this list of roles. All these folks are very involved in the curriculum process. One of the things that is on the horizon, and we're trying very hard to implement as part of the curriculum process, is the, I guess for lack of a better word, use of focus groups. Because it's difficult to pay associate faculty for their time, but asking for associate faculty to come in the room in an Adobe meeting and share firsthand what they desire for courses, for newly launched programs as well as revision, and really get the associate faculty at the course level as well as the program level far more empowered. I'm an advocate for this, having worked well over a decade as an associate or adjunct faculty in that model, and knowing the value of having some stake or ownership in the courses that we teach. I'm a huge advocate for that, and I'm very pleased to report that our curriculum innovations and learning services team out of Bridgepoint that's working with Ashford University on curriculum development is very open to this idea of faculty focus groups. So I think we have more positive things coming on the horizon. For now, what I would advise any associate faculty here today or listening to this recording is to reach out to your program chair or your executive dean of the college in which the courses you teach are housed, and ask to be involved. Show up and be present and advocate for yourself to have that ownership in the curriculum process. We can't, unseen, untold, unsold. Your brilliance, it does not get into our consideration at the course development level unless we know you're interested. So don't be shy. Reach out. If you can volunteer time, great. And it may eventually lead to a paid contract. Cannot guarantee that, but you just never know. But please speak up. Empower yourself. You are the front lines. We are the faculty. We're in the trench in these courses. And unless we speak up and advocate for our needs and taking ownership of that curriculum, it just won't happen. So be powerful and empower yourself.
So while we have a couple of more moments, I'm noticing Paula's comments about faculty. I like her comment about how she thinks faculty likes to create and also enjoy student interaction, but also sees the importance of allowing those who deliver the curriculum to adapt and improve upon it. Would you like to comment more about that, Lisa?
I can, but I was actually looking at Paula's comment and just writing awesome. I think at every college there is this sort of implicit or implied encouragement among the full-time faculty developers and all the staff teams working on curriculum to reach out to the associates, but we just don't have that process streamlined yet, Paula and others. So again, just sort of a grassroots initiative here. I strongly encourage you to reach out, or lean in with your willingness to be a part of the curriculum, and we can develop something of a momentum around that need. Everybody wants to be inclusive. Time is never on our side, and no excuses, definitely no excuses. But again, it really comes down to making yourself heard and jumping in the fire with us, so that we know you want to participate.
So
all right, looks like oh, go ahead.
I was going to say we have about 2 minutes left, so if there's any last-minute questions or comments, feel free to type them in. Again, I want to thank you both, Lisa and John, for this session, and I love the comments from the participants. I love that you and John back and forth with responding to everyone and helping with questions. It's really been great, and then for adding that extra Google form as well.
Well, again, thanks for having me. It was fun.
And then just to remind everyone, this present will be available for viewing in the CETL soon, and we're also going to send out an email when the live sessions are available. Don't forget to also go to the TLC app and rate this session. And for now, use the link in the room for a quick end-of-session survey. That link is listed right below the slide that you see right now, following up in references. So please do that now. And then finally, we will be sending you an end-of-conference survey to provide more in-depth feedback on the conference as a whole. Thank you again so much, all of you, for your participation, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.